Can everyone hear me? We've just been waiting. We lost Emma earlier. She got pinged with the COVID pingometer. And we've been waiting for Louise, who has got stuck and said you must start without me. So
she's been pinged.
Oh, she's been pinged and Emma's got stuck. So
something like that.
the good news is we are joined by two phenomenal legends in their own sectors, and I'm really going to pump them hard. I know them both well, so we can have a really, really good conversation. Firstly, welcome to you all. Thanks for coming. Those of you who don't know me, I put the Big Ten together, but more interestingly, perhaps I had a career in biomedical research and science 15 years before being elected to Parliament in 2010, and then managed to persuade David Cameron that, as well as a deficit strategy, we should have a bold long-term growth strategy. And the most important sector is our life science sector, a sector in the UK, not just pharmaceuticals, but medicines research, discovery, digital health, diagnostics, that's worth about £60 billion, employs 250,000 of the highest skilled people in the country, isn't just in Cambridge, it's all around the country, and isn't just a major contributor to GDP, but is actually saving lives, generating health, helping people to live longer and healthier lives. Key sector. And at the end of the conversation, David Cameron said, what do you think we should do? I said, I think we should stop resting on our laurels and pretending that because we've got GSK and AZ headquartered here, we're going to be a life science powerhouse forever. We won't. The landscape is changing. Genomics and informatics are totally shattering the way drugs are discovered. I've been in an industry that has basically been in designing drugs, 80% of which fail. They take 15 years to bring to market. And if 80% of them are failing, you then have to charge a huge amount of money to recoup your losses on those that do. With genomics and with informatics, you can start to look at patient groups. Basically, every drug has a bell curve. On the left-hand side, it doesn't have any impact, has a little bit of impact, has quite good impact, has maximal impact, has less impact, side effects, and death. And the industry spends billions chopping the ends off that curve and lowering the dose so that it can say the drug works in everybody. The truth is that when you actually look at the bell curve of a drug, you discover it's optimal for a small subsection. Now, I made my first bit of success in the sector by creating a company to chuck a massive piece of AI at the pharmacopoeia of failed drugs and profiling them and discovering that actually, if you have the phenotypic, the hospital records of patients, I don't mean individual records, but if you can say, wow, 80% of people in whom that drug didn't work also had diabetes and were also on these two drugs, you start to get a handle on who we should be giving the drug to. Much more excitingly, you start to get a handle on how you might develop the next drugs, not by making one that fits all and then discovering it fails, but starting with the patients, starting with their blood, starting with their phenotypic history, their disease history. So you go back to hospital, which is where British medical science and biomedicine started, and you work with leading clinicians who've got the insights on the front line. And on my left is sitting Professor Charlie Craddock, who, as I was espousing this as Life Science Minister, Charlie came and found me and said, I'm doing it here in Birmingham. And indeed, he is doing it. And he's set up the most extraordinary institute for translational accelerated medicine, has pulled in £300 million of free drugs, because, by the way, if the drugs are in a trial, we don't have to pay for them. But more importantly, he saved many, many lives, including one of the Big Ten patron, Graham Hansen-Silk, who, when I first met him, said 10 years ago I was given 3 years to live, and then I met Charlie Craddock. So Charlie's going to tell us a bit about what that model of accelerated genomic phenotypic research medicine can do. And I'm also joined by Séamus from the Northern Health Science Alliance, who's going to tell us about how this has got an incredible opportunity, this model of research, in the north of this country. Now, I confess I was dragged up, brought up, educated, and kicked around in Cambridge. But I, as Life Science Minister, the first thing I did was to go to South Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland to highlight that this is not just a Golden Triangle phenomenon. Yes, the biology and the technology in Oxford and Cambridge is phenomenal, but in this new model of patient-centered research, where you're working with patients, volunteering their medical records in clinical trials to help drive medicine, you need, guess what, patients. And Addenbrooke's is a phenomenal research hospital, but it's very badly connected to its hinterland of patients. What you want is a place that's got 8 great university hospitals, 20 million people with an extraordinary genetic diversity of all different backgrounds. What you want is the Northern Health Alliance, which I helped to set up with the team, the whole model being that the Northern Health Science Alliance will then create for the world a place where you can come and say, can you find me 1 million patients with this condition? You need scale, but you need one access point. So these two gents, between them, are going to tell us a story, Charlie, about how you actually unlock this model of research in the NHS, working with patients. And perhaps, Charlie, you can shine some insights on what patients really want, because the cry goes up, George, patients don't want their data to be used. I beg to differ, and I think you do too. George, patients don't want to be bothered by... Actually, my experience is that patients, when they get a diagnosis, really want to be engaged in trials. They really want their data shared. They really want to be working in translational research hubs. And perhaps, Séamus, you can tell us then a bit about how we could build hubs across the north with geniuses like Charlie building out so that everyone in the NHS is benefiting, and Britain becomes a global powerhouse for this model. By the way, if we're going to make Brexit a success, and we've left the European Medicines Agency, my argument is we do not want to become a lame follower. We now have to step up and lead, and we've got to raise the bar. It's not a race to the bottom. We need to race to the top and excite the world with what the UK can do. We did it on vaccines. Now let's do it on clinical trials, digital research, engaging patients in research, make Britain, which will never be the top price payer for drugs. Believe me, I was the minister for the drugs budget. We pay the lowest prices at the slowest rate in the world. Why is the industry ever going to come here? It won't be because of price. The only compelling reason they come here is because they get to work with people like Charlie and plug into networks like the NHSA and click and find access to patients so the drugs are developed here, tested here, proven here, licensed here for global use. And we, in return for the privilege of allowing them to come here to develop their drugs, get a massive discount. And that is the model that I was setting in place as Minister for LifeScience. And these two gents are going to tell us that it wasn't nonsense. We can actually do it. So, Charlie, over to you. Can you tell us the story of your work and your unit?
Yeah, thanks, George. And it's a great pleasure to be here at this wonderful festival. So I want to talk about opportunities for patients. And I also want to talk about opportunities to generate money that plows back into the NHS, that goes back to help patients. But I'm going to also emphasize the real importance of creative thinking about how we do that. So just to think about the opportunities for patients. So I work with patients with blood cancer in a large unit in Birmingham. And so every day I am seeing fantastic patients coming up from areas of great deprivation, Stoke-on-Trent, Dudley, 6 million catchment region. And what the patients ardently want, it's not surprising, but what they ardently want for many of these diseases that would otherwise be fatal is connection as soon as possible with diagnostics, genomics, that will predict which drugs they should receive. And secondly, most importantly, is they want to be among the first in the world, rather than the last in the world, to access these breaking new therapies. So in the last 20 years, this really has become an extraordinarily exciting time if you're working in the treatment of cancer. But of course, increasingly in a whole bunch of other diseases, dementia, arthritis, where we are seeing the fruits of 70 years investment of trillions of dollars, pounds across the world into basic biomedical science. So remember, it was 1953, I think, when Watson and Crick in Cambridge had this vision of the structure of DNA. And that drove this enormous investment across the world into basic biomedical research, into amazing institutes, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, go through it. And the first line of every grant to go into that basic biomedical research was, if you give us this money, patients will benefit. And the reality is that the first 50 years of that trajectory were extraordinary because we had developed and have now a profound understanding of what goes wrong in a cell to give you a particular disease. And that gives you the opportunity to then target it with drugs. But up until 20 years ago, really it was extremely difficult to say to a patient sitting in front of you how the investment of their tax pounds, their fathers or their mothers or their families over that period had actually changed much. And I remember when I was in Oxford doing my PhD, we had the Minister for Health came spoke to my boffin boss, and he said, well, actually, tell me how is a patient being helped? And it was the first time I saw this brilliant man shift uneasily on his feet, because actually until 1999, 4th of December, New Orleans, American Society of Haematology, I was there. It was a Saturday afternoon, I was jet lagged, and there was a call between going to the bar and having a beer or going to the plenary session. I fortunately made the right call because it was the most extraordinary event in my professional life ever. A guy called Brian Drucker had worked with the scientists who understood what caused at a molecular level a disease called chronic myeloid leukemia. And then he worked with Novartis, the big pharma company, and they pulled out a drug that specifically targeted the leukemic cells. Didn't have any other real toxicity elsewhere. So completely different from chemotherapy. So Brian stood up on the 4th of December and he announced the results of the first real study in the world of targeted therapy, a cohort of 30 patients with advanced chronic phase.
Charlie, can I just check? When you said completely different to chemotherapy, because chemotherapy is basically poison, isn't it?
Yeah, and it wipes out all your cells. It's like a blunderbuster. So this was targeted magic bullet. And Brian, to this hushed audience of about 6,000 people, described how these patients with end-stage disease who were dying had Lazarus-like gone into remission and stepped up from their beds and worked. And it was the most moving moment ever, because everybody sat there and they thought, this is the future. This is going to change things. And in fact, beautifully, he quoted Isaac Newton and said, if I've achieved greatness, it's only because I stand on the shoulder of giants. In other words, the science was so important. But what we were moving then into was a phase where you use the science to help patients. So to cut a very long story short, in the last 20 years, we are now seeing not just blood cancers that were previously untreatable, but other cancers, segments of them, falling away and becoming diseases perhaps like diabetes, where you live with it, or actually it was eradicated, previously untreatable diseases. So what we have to do, what our ethical duty is to connect patients with these amazing treatments, not just in cancer, but across the piece. Because if we can do that, in 20 years, plausibly, many of these diseases are gone. So if I am a patient, what is the block? Well, the way that we accelerate the assessment of these new treatments is to speed up the trials to regulatory standards so they can be approved by EMA or FDA or whoever it is, so that we can actually then start giving them safely to patients. And for that to happen, I need, as a patient, to have access to a clinical trial that is delivering really high quality data. And yet, until we set up our blood cancer trial networks, for many, many patients in the UK, you didn't have access to a trial because you didn't have a research nurse. So what we've done, and George has been pivotal in helping us with this, is in blood cancer, establish a network in major centres, regardless of whether they're Oxford, Cambridge, or the Golden Triangle, but actually in Stoke-on-Trent, actually in Manchester, actually in areas of deprivation, where there's funded research teams allowing patients to have equal access to these pivotal breaking trials. And in the process, we accelerate the assessment of these therapies so that they can become approved even quicker. So that's what we've done, and that's what's important. There has been this collapse, however, largely because of COVID, in the ability of philanthropy to raise money and fund these networks. So what we're proposing is that you set up a new trial delivery vehicle that is highly competitive with the other ways that new drugs are assessed, which is by the contract research organization sectors, highly profitable but very lazy and slow. And by setting up through academic networks the ability to deliver these registration-enabling trials as quickly as possible through networks and through a trial delivery company, you can, with the right governance system, generate substantial new funds, allow patients to see these new therapies, and if you get the governance right and these vehicles are owned by the community, that new money that is generated through successful delivery of the trials all comes back to fund more research nurses and data managers and new trials.
Charlie, I'm going to interrupt you there because, folks, what he's just said is actually quite revolutionary. Just think for a moment, it's moving medicine from something done to you when it's convenient for the system to do it to you, to empowering patients to come together and say, you've got blood cancer, I've got blood cancer, she's got, let's get together, let's form a not-for-profit mutual corporation so that we can go to industry and say, would you like to work with us, patients who've got blood cancer, and our clinician, Charlie? You can have access to our shared data, to our clinical research networks. We're not a contract research organisation charging you 170% overhead. We're just going to recoup our costs, and if we can make a bit of profit, we'll put it back into training nurses. This is a mutual blood cancer company set up by and for patients, by the charities and their clinicians, cutting out the middleman. And it's hugely exciting. When I was minister, I would say to my civil servants, look, patients love this. Well, Minister, they're marching up and down in Whitehall saying they don't want data to be released. And I said, no, the people who should be marching up and down are the patients who've got disease, but they're not. They're lying at home dealing with disease. We need to liberate the patient voice, and that's what Charlie's doing. It's one of the most exciting projects in the country because if it works, which I'm confident it will, other disease groups will say, hang on, we can do that. Patients start to get together, form a digital platform, slide my consent bar, share my data. They're not giving it away to industry. They're allowing Charlie, their clinician, their NHS clinician through the values of the NHS, to go to industry and say, is it valuable for you? I've got 500,000 patients. And what's the response of industry?
The response of industry is this is incredibly exciting because it allows them to develop these drugs quicker. And we're saying it's incredibly exciting for our patients because it allows the patients to see the drugs quicker, and it provides a transformative treatment option, often where none exists. So in short, George, it was a perfect summary. And at the heart of this is a Quaker principle, that any surplus that is generated is owned by the patients and immediately comes back to help patients, and that patients are empowered in the process as we drive forward through a new model. Just like we're driving electric cars. You know, in 5 years, we've completely changed how we think about driving. Well, I think for clinical trials, we urgently need these new models as well.
And so my argument to the Prime Minister is, off the back of a year when we have literally smashed it globally with the COVID recovery trial, just in case any of you aren't aware, it has been the defining trial for COVID vaccines. The UK trial, bigger than the next 10 trials put together. The UK has absolutely put a man on the moon. It's the equivalent, I mean, it's the most extraordinary success. And my argument to the PM is, right now, let's build off the back of that, empower Charlies around the country in clinical centres, allow patients to form little mutual groups. Let's create digital platforms so when you get a diagnosis, you go straight on with a password to the blood cancer group or the diabetes group or the brain cancer group. Share your data with each other, with your clinicians, and through these people, go to industry. Now, Séamus, can you tell us about the Northern Health Science Alliance and why this is so exciting?
Yeah, thanks, George. My name's Séamus O'Neill. I'm the chief executive of this thing that George has introduced you to called the Northern Health Science Alliance. So it's a response to the fact the system is broken. The reason that this organisation that Charlie's talking about is needed is to circumvent parochialism and silo working that has become embedded, right? So some of us for our sins, which are legion, have been tasked with joining up the 10 big research-intensive universities across the north of England with the big NHS trusts and the academic health science networks. So that goes from basic science, where the potent molecules and the chromosome translocation that in CML that shows you what gene you're looking at, that then tells you what the marker, what the molecule could be, which tells you what the treatment is, and 15 years later you have a drug in trials, right? So that basic science through to clinical practice, through to economic value, is the issue here. But our system of academia and the NHS working with industry is fragmented. And one of the things that we get in the north is that we get ignored. I have loved being in Coventry this week because what we can identify with here, what you guys do on batteries, world leading, and the automotive stuff and the creatives that we've seen, that's not visible outside the Whitehall hedge, or not visible nearly enough. Department of International Trade do not go to the advanced therapies people in Birmingham and the advanced therapies people in Newcastle, Leeds, Manchester. They will go to UCL and take the delegation from there. Therefore, the visibility of the UK, as George has said, is skewed. That's not because they're lazy or evil people. It's because they can reach, and we're not connected enough in our messaging and unified enough in our messaging as organizations. So my job and the small team that I run we try to get the people, the organizations in the north to leave their team shirts at the door and behave collegiately, collectively, so that patients across 16 million population have access, in a unified way to trials, that we federate the data sets, for example, across big cities, an initiative called Connected Health Cities, which has spawned a number of very, very effective city care records, but didn't quite get to joining the 6 of them up between Bradford, Newcastle, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool. That would give you 16 million connected records with a level of trust in that system because of the regional identity, where people in Newcastle trust their clinician, they trust the regional identity to a level that is, probably unique.
So Séamus, because folks might not, you've described well how fractured the siloed old system is, but let me just so no one's in any doubt. This is, what normally happens is this: pharma company develops a drug, and it gets it to the point where it thinks it's safe, and it looks like it might have some impact. And then what they do is they go, right, which countries are most likely to pay the largest amount for it? Let's go and do the trials there. And they go to America, they go to Switzerland, they go to Germany. They're looking for market authorization and clearance. On that basis, they are not going to come to the UK because we pay very low prices and we've become a very slow payer. The NHS rations your money by saying we'll buy the drug later when it's nearly off patent and it's generic and cancer patients can just wait until the drug's cheap. That's what's actually been going on. And my argument as minister was, hang on, that's completely the wrong approach. What we should be doing is going to industry and saying, you know how the model is changing and you're not making blockbusters anymore. You're looking for cohorts of patients who you can design drugs around and go straight to the cohorts. Yeah. Well, we in the UK are building an infrastructure that will allow you to identify the patient groups for whom you can then make the drug. Really? Yeah. Well, how do you do that? Well, we launched Genomics England, so we've got large-scale genomics. We're able to hit a computer and go, here are all the people in the NHS who've had cancer, who haven't responded to this drug, and this is the genetic sequence that suggests that's why. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't know where they live, but we know we've got now 100,000 patients who are absolutely in the sweet spot. Yeah. Imagine if we could then contact them and say, through Charlie's network, not the pharma company ringing them up and saying, would you like my drug? Through Charlie's networks and through Séamus's networks and say, we're thinking of designing a drug for this group. That is a global USP. It's not how anyone else in the world is doing it. And the real opportunity for us is to harness the NHS and the values of the NHS and genomics and informatics in an NHS value set so that these heroes can get industry to bring the money to us, develop the drugs here, we get them for free, and we get NHS patients accelerated access. If we don't do this, we in this room will end up getting slow access, low access, and for the next generation of drugs, no access. Some of these therapies are going to cost £150,000 a year. The NHS quality is 35 grand. We're just not going to buy them. So unless we find a new model for getting industry to come here, we're all going to suffer. People in this room, between us, we're not going to get the drug. So this is not just a kind of vaguely nice idea. To me, this is completely fundamental.
We're also going to end up an awful lot poorer as a country. Yeah. Because the new generation of advanced diagnostics based on data and lifestyle and behaviour change are going to be beyond us. And now what we have to build is a very high trust environment. And as George said, based on the ethos of the NHS, if the levels of trust in our practitioners and our systems is beyond what any other country has. You can go to 60 million people. In theory, we need to make that in practice, because that positioning the UK in the global economy We had a brilliant example just before from the agri-tech business, where it's about building a reputation and trust in standards, and then living up to those.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to live up to, when your data is in the NHS, you can trust what's done with it, and you don't have to get consented every time it's used, but you see what's happening and you get fed back through the blood network. These good things happen because you were a data donor.
Yeah. So let's take some questions. Hands up here. We've got some coming in on Slido. To the folks out there who are following online, this is your moment. Please use the Slido function, send some questions in. They'll come up on the screen and I will pick them up. Gentlemen here, yeah. Can we get a microphone? Roving mic?
Hi guys, I applaud what you're trying to do, but it seems to miss a very big element. I am a CEO of a company called Capital Enterprise. We invest and support startups. We run a program, 2 programs, one in precision medicine. We just started one in cancer tech, funded by CR UK and Roche Diagnostics. We received 260 academic applications from people who are linked to a UK university who want to basically commercialize that technology. We could only take 50 and we're only going to fund 10. And you keep talking about incumbents, assuming that it's going to be Swiss or American or Chinese companies, and you're missing the amazing talent we have here in the UK to develop our own solutions. So I'm throwing it back to you, kind of like the massive amount of demand. We had 1 in 10 researchers basically in the UK wanting to commercialize their research from our program in cancer, diagnostics, screening, computational biology approaches. So what is being done for them?
So I can respond to that, and it's a good question. What we're trying to create is a global USP, as George says, in clinical trials. And at the moment, what has a fragmented landscape in terms of trial delivery, particularly with high pharmacovigilance, which is what's required for registration of a drug. It's a highly fragmented landscape. And what we're saying is you put these big centers together. We've had in our 2 blood cancer networks, you create catchment regions of 30 million. You put in the research nurses that are required to actually allow the patients to be recruited. They don't exist at the moment. You have to fund them. And you have clinicians working with patients. You've created something that is magical and is a USP, and actually is a wonderful thing for your entrepreneurs to work with. But we have to create the environment. It doesn't exist, and we have to have innovative models to do that. Once you do that, patients see drugs quicker. You generate wealth because you get outside investment in the clinical trial setting, and also we help your brilliant people do translational medicine.
I agree. On one of our programs, a third of the startups come from overseas, and they're coming here because they can access the NHS clinical research teams. Basically at some of our big teaching hospitals. One actually we do a lot with is Leeds. Yeah. And so it's great, but themselves are massively underfunded. They don't have a receptive market. It's incredibly difficult for them. They tend to then go to the States.
Can I ask, do you mean as entrepreneurs or as scientists they're underfunded?
They're we call them venture scientists. They're in the early stages, they are mainly led by the inventors with support from commercial expertise as advisors.
Séamus,
I think we do need to do more on that. We call it the innovation pathway. There's when people invent things, whether it's academia or industry, or in a shed, they know nothing of the application of that AI algorithm to a clinical problem. They need hand-holding, they need support. It's almost like there's a lot of discussion about the mission of the NHS, the broader mission of the NHS. It's the worst possible time to have that discussion, because as a support structure for British biotech and bioindustries, it's a phenomenal asset. It's on its knees at the minute, but we have, I think, the NIHR, National Institute for Health Research, have done a lot of work in standing infrastructure, but probably not in terms of the pre-development with the bright people of their ideas. I think there needs to be a line in there, in NHS organisations' expectations and metrics, that says this is how we work with industry and this is the value we add. So if the company to understand, I've got this AI algorithm, what do I apply it to? Who do I ask? Where could it be adding value? What's the market? We need a standing infrastructure to do that for companies.
I would also say on a level up, these are very mobile.
Exactly.
They will
yeah.
move.
It's an opportunity for leveling
It's an
up.
opportunity to get scientists from the Golden Triangle, when they're taken to try and get to the first clinical trial and regulation, etc., to get out of the Golden Triangle.
And the Life Sciences vision did have a section on leveling up in it, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, my chosen specialised subject will be barriers to UK healthcare innovation. The truth is the NHS is both the golden asset and the biggest barrier.
Yes.
It's not a national health service. It's a regional disease management bureaucracy. It's very top down. There's nothing wrong with the people who work in it. It's the structure. And for an innovator in the NHS, in a DGH or in a tertiary hospital, to navigate your way through the payment systems, the contract systems, an innovation is disruptive. And it's the barriers to disruption in the NHS are phenomenal. When I was a VC, if someone came to me and said, I've got a brilliant technology that will save the NHS, I'd just say, I'm so sorry. I've only got a 10-year fund. I haven't got time to invest in the NHS because I know it'll take too long. And that is a massive problem. So as a system, it is this huge mothership of opportunity for the UK globally. But internally, it's a really dysfunctional place to work and to generate innovation.
It is incredibly true. I mean, as an investor, we are often getting them to focus on markets like the States as their first market. But they come here to trial, to develop, to build into our academic base, to work with the NHS. And I just feel that if we had more, we could get more of them into the regions that we had
I agree.
thought about, not just the big Mercs and the big kind of Roches.
Agreed.
There's something else that the NHS, and I say this as a former minister for life science and health innovation, and a huge supporter of the NHS, it still thinks of innovation as a sort of tick box sidebar. We deliver health, medicine, and then we do a bit of innovation. As a system, it is not fundamentally wired to embrace innovation, harness innovation, deliver better services off the basis of it. It thinks of it as a bit like corporate social responsibility in the first phase. It was, we run a business, we make money, and we do a little bit of CSR. The NHS thinks of innovation like that, and until we really mainstream it, and it's our best friend. If you really embrace digital health, we can start getting people diagnosed earlier without having to queue up at the GP, without having to drive a car and pump out emissions. Biggest car usage in the country, organisation, NHS. Once you start to embrace technology, you change the way health works. You empower the patients, you diagnose smart, but the NHS has got to think really strategically about that, rather than view it as a sort of, oh yes, we also do some innovation on Sunday. And that's a big problem.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Ben.
Thank you very much. My question is a very simple one, really. The value which we create as patients, those of us who are not experts, either as practitioners or investors or indeed innovators. My question is, how can we as health citizens maximize the value that we contribute? Setting aside for a moment the questions about how that value is exploited and distributed, my question is a simple one. For us lay people, how can we be the best possible health citizens and patients? In terms, for example, I mean, you've mentioned those that share their data should be first to benefit. I wonder if you have a manifesto for the rest of us to follow to support what you're doing.
Séamus.
That's the sort of left field thing you get at Big Tent, isn't it? Yeah. It's great. So the best thing that I think the lessons from the discussion yesterday and from today that I have heard, the best things we can do are to help each other stay well. I think that's the biggest single thing we can do. Some of the things that I think Penny Mordaunt, dwelled on a little bit yesterday, were about putting society back together again during COVID, and the help and support structures, the church groups, the community groups, that the broader determinants of health that contribute probably 90% to our well-being are not the CT scans and the interventions, but the bit that we need to stitch back together again as a society is, particularly around mental health and well-being, and that's how we treat each other. and the conversations and the narratives. Now, George is absolutely pig sick of me saying this, but it's putting the compassion back in to the discussions about, obesity, about mental health, about, all the things that can be stigmatized, so that people don't feel they're being done to. People feel that agency, and they feel reciprocity from the systems that they work with, that the systems are helping them, not inflicting more guilt. I think those are the things. I'm sorry, that's not, but I don't apologize for that not being an NHS-related answer, because the NHS is not.
No, it's a good answer, because the question was about active
it was about
citizenship.
well-being and health rather than sickness.
Thank you. Charlie?
I would just echo that. I think, so I see patients every day, possibly like you, it sounds like. Many patients do not feel empowered. And the most important thing is to be putting the patient right at the heart of access to these new therapies and almost excitement in what can be done. I hear lots of stories about not being able to access GPs and actually a feeling that there's nothing you can do about that. That's what the system is. We have to let patients be wanting to drive innovation and empower them. And we don't at the moment.
And I've got one to add, Ben, which is you've been in business very successfully. One thing I think we can all do is in our work to think about health, healthier growth, healthier workplaces, healthier workforces as a mainstream part of running a good organization. In the same way that I criticize the NHS for thinking of innovation as something you do on a Sunday afternoon, I think a lot of traditional businesses think productivity, work, time, 9 till 6, output, bottom line. What? Oh, staff welfare? Oh, yes, I suppose we'd better have some food in the canteen and maybe. And I think more and more companies are now thinking about, COVID has been the most massive wake-up call. Health is really valuable. Disease is really expensive. If we can harness some of that in a healthier growth model going forward, we'll be in a better place. And I'm struck by how many companies, I set up a global healthier growth commission. Companies are coming forward and saying, we want to make our workforce healthier. We want to reduce workplace illness. And that's both back pain, which is the #1 cause of absenteeism in the British workforce today. That's from bad chairs, bad desks, bad offices. Everyone's sitting up now. Look, everyone's suddenly in this. So it's basic stuff like back pain. It's things like a car share scheme. If a company has a car share scheme, instead of everyone driving to work in one car, polluting the city, car share schemes, you then walk to the person who's got the car. You're building fitness and health in. More and more companies now putting a good canteen back. In the 80s, it was old-fashioned. Canteens were from the 1950s. You want to go and get a Big Mac. Now companies are saying, no, we're going to put good food in. And actually it's better. And our team breathe and they have some time off. That practical and mental health, thinking, is it healthy for my staff to sit looking at a screen for 12 hours? No. And I just noticed more and more companies now, whether it's a little company, I have a team of 4 in my parliamentary office. This year, for the first time, if I'm honest, I've really thought about their mental health. Really thought about it. And if everyone does that, to your point, I think we'll create a healthier society. And actually, the Treasury will save a fortune. The world I want is the one where they give us some of that fortune back and say, well done, guys, you've saved some money. And it's harnessing, and I think the key is to put some costs around boundaries of place. For example, here in the West Midlands, you may not know this, but it's the obesity capital of Europe. That's because it's it's the car city, right? It's got ring roads and beltways, and it was designed in the 60s, 70s really as a car city. What does that cost the UK? Well, fortunately, those clever people in the Treasury have done some numbers. They're probably wrong, but let's take them. 4 billion a year is what the Treasury say obesity costs the UK, obesity in the West Midlands. Well, my response to that is, great, I'll take it. Let's agree that that 4 billion over the next 10 years is set to go up to 5 billion. And here's the challenge. If you can save some of that money, you can keep 10%, 20%, and reinvest it back into your city. Now, if that was the call from government, I think you would see 1,000 flowers bloom. And Ben, you'd probably set up the Fitter West Midlands partnership. Come on, guys, he just said we can keep 10% of $1 billion. And you'd be issuing Fitbits, you'd get bike lanes, and I think that's the revolution.
So I think this is fundamentally important. So within the health service, we need to be incentivizing chief executives or GPs for contribution to the life sciences economy, because that grows taxes, but they don't see any benefit. So I think incentivization runs through the whole system.
Great question. Coming in from Mike Smith online. How can we streamline the bureaucratic inefficiency within the NHS in order to benefit everyone as much as possible with regard to clinical trials of new therapies and research? Charlie, I'm going to give that to you. Bureaucratic inefficiency within the NHS.
Yeah, so this is difficult, isn't it? But I think it just comes back to the points you were making, George, is we need to be saying, if you are in charge of a trust or a GP practice and you contribute to delivery on trials, and that contributes to UK PLC, you need to financially see the benefit.
Yep.
At the moment, George is right. There are some great chief executives, great GPs, but if they do it, that's great, but if they don't, it doesn't matter.
And to be clear, when you say, I know you well enough, when you say and when I say financially benefit, we do not mean with a Porsche. What we mean is, if Craddock's clinic saves the UK, as it has done, £300 million worth of free drugs into this area, then if the Treasury at least gave you 10% of that, so 20 million, you're not going to spend it on a...
So the money flows back automatically into patient care, which is what the leaders of these hospitals want to say. So one is to incentivize in the right direction. The second thing, I think, is actually to quantify the economic benefit of clinical trials, which is probably billions. We did a small bit in blood cancer, and it was $250 million just by putting on, because not only free drugs, but also patients don't have to be treated with standard NHS therapies.
Yeah.
So let's do some serious work about how does R&D, how do trials benefit the whole health service, and then think about, again, you just put 10% of that back in, you transform the environment.
Well, we've only got 2 minutes left. Any hands up? Yeah, gentleman here. And here.
Thanks very much. So my question is regarding the recent COVID outbreak that we've had, and we've seen some people, part of the anti-vax movement, who are distrustful of the healthcare systems and scientific research and life science research. Do you feel that building this network and doing some patient empowerment is likely to impact that in some way?
We're going to take the questions all in one go. So let's hold that thought. Yep. Gentleman here. Any other last questions?
Yes, not to mythologize or romanticize the past, but if we look back at other societies, or even around the world at other societies, so-called blue zones, what have you, good mental and physical health is kind of endogenous to the structural way society works. So my question is, can we find ways? It doesn't have to be perfect. We can't all go and live in Hokkaido in the 19th century or something. But how can we begin to, for instance, in the design of housing, inculcate good mental health?
Brilliant. So anti-vax, mental health, and Tim, last question. I'm getting called 2. Is that 2 minutes or 2 seconds I got left? 2 minutes.
So very quickly, Professor Garrett, building on your comment a second ago about the direct economic return that might come, how would you introduce that and convince people that's a good idea and stand up to charge as you were partially privatising the NHS, when a private clinic could perhaps come in with a research based on exactly that, and we live in a moment right now where, thanks to everything that's happened in the last 18 months, actually fundamentally touching the NHS is probably the one political can't do, ironically, that's been made much worse by COVID, despite the fact that everybody agrees it needs to happen.
So
okay,
I'll
3 questions. Can you deal with that and the anti-vax, and then Séamus, will you deal with the...
So one is, what we're talking about is increasing NHS capacity. We're growing the resource that goes into the NHS and making it more resilient, period. There's no privatisation because all the money comes back to patients to be spent in the NHS. One. Second is, I do think this question is about empowering patients, and I think it is making patients and the population understand the granularity of the excitement of the opportunities. And I think at the moment we don't really make patients the pivotal part of that conversation. I think that would help.
Anti-vax, Charlie. That's
sorry, that was my answer to that.
Good, sorry.
Can I develop on that?
Yes, please.
Because I think the anti-vax one is it goes really, really deep. I think the work, and it goes to the UK's position, whether it's on agri-tech, or health tech, that the world desperately needs an authoritative version of the truth. If ever the world needed this post-truth world, what happens in post-truth world is people doubt everything, and that's been endemic. You've got it's a bloody vaccine. It works. It stops you dying. Just take it. But that is not enough. If there's so much fluff and flannel in the system, we need to work really, really hard on that. And I think the UK's position globally is going to be based on that high trust, high evidence environment, and that comes from the political narrative all the way down to the clinical trials.
Completely right. Trust.
Right. So, and I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of designing in health in all policies. So the integrated care systems have got to look at their contribution to the economy, to growing the UK economy. They've got to have metrics around that, and they've got to make sure that people trust what they're doing because there's transparency and openness, and they're seen to be doing it with localism has been a big feature of this week. To get the West Midlands moving, trust the people in the West Midlands and the leaders to do it, right? It's the same, and if you're designing housing or you're designing ring roads or whatever it is, health first should be in there.
Thank you. Well, what a great session. I'm just going to reflect on that last question about housing. I think one of the joys of being a constituency MP is all these great ethereal questions come down to a specific place with a line around it, which you're responsible for articulating the needs of and speaking to. And in Norfolk, in my county, my constituency, we have 3 hospitals, 900,000 people. It's a big rural, dispersed county. It's huge and heavily centralised healthcare. People spending hours trying to get buses and driving to the hospitals. And we've neglected grassroots community care. We're one of the older counties, huge social care, massively underfunded through local government. So we're piling people up in hospitals, costing us a fortune. So the integrated, and we made a massive mistake in the 2012 Act by fragmenting it all, 5 CCGs, broke up the PCT. I mean, it's been a nightmare. So we're now finally integrating again properly. But the integrated care system is at the current moment a conversation by enlightened local leaders about the sort of system they'd like to run. And while they're having it, we're building boiler and brick housing with 3-car commuting on the A11 and building in the obesity, the junk food, garage sandwich, Coca-Cola lifestyles that will build the obesity and the cancer for the next generation. It is completely bonkers. And to me, the only answer, serious answer to your question, is to create proper local integrated incentives. And if you took Norfolk and said, guys, this is your structural health deficit, cost of aging, obesity, diabetes, and dementia, the Treasury have got those numbers. That's what's going to happen if we carry on as we are. If you can reduce that a bit, you can keep half the saving. Suddenly, I guarantee, I know the people involved in the 3 hospital chief executives who are currently rewarded by being busy. If we said, if you can define the savings, you can turn your empty wards into research wards and do trials, and we can fund proper community-based care and digital health, they'll do it. And I think it's all about incentives, by which I don't mean Porsches for everybody. When people hear Tory talk about incentives, they think I mean personal wealth. The joy of the NHS is it's collective. And the incentive is your unit could get £100,000 a year or £500,000 and you could train some more nurses. But without those incentives created in London, I don't think it's going to happen. And that's my... Yeah. Can I, on all of your behalf, thank these two for the work they do. Charlie is literally one of our leading blood cancer scientists. He's globally recognized, but he's something else. He's a hero in this part of the country because he has saved hundreds of lives of people who were given 3 years to live. And Séamus is building something in the Northern Health Science Alliance, which is so important, partly because for the UK economy, it's contributing to this incredible sector, but it's also meaning that it's not just people in Oxford and Cambridge who get access to the drugs, it's people across the north. So will you show your appreciation, please, for their work? Thank you.
Brilliant.